Hi, my name is Emmelyn Butterfield-Rosen, and I'm a professor of 19th century art at the Institute of Fine Arts in New York City. Behind me is one of the great monuments of modern painting, Bathers at Asnières by Seurat. It's a simple image of repose, men and boys sitting and waiting on the banks of the River Seine, on the suburban outskirts of Paris. Yet there's something unsettling about this picture. What is it exactly that feels strange about the figures in this canvas? Because they do look weird. Although there's nothing so remarkable about this tranquil scene, and although this canvas is probably already extremely familiar for many who encounter it here in the National Gallery as this icon of modern life painting in the 19th century, something about the bathers is still unsettling to viewers after nearly 150 years. The people pictured before us here seem both present and absent, there and not there. And in this way, Seurat is undoing centuries of expectation about how human presence should appear in art. And by understanding how he does that, we can begin to see how Seurat and the movement in modern painting that he initiated, Neo-Impressionism, marks a transformation in a very long tradition of representing the human being in European art. When Seurat painted the Bathers in 1884, he was just 24, and it marked his debut, the first painting he ever exhibited to the public. And in the years before, Seurat had spent a long period studying at the École des Beaux-Arts, at the time the most prestigious and traditional art academy in Europe. His education was much the same there as it had been for artists since the Renaissance. He studied anatomy, he copied ancient Greek and Roman statues, and he learned to draw from life in front of live, naked models. This entire training program revolved around the human body, which was considered art's noblest subject, the most expressive, the most complex, and the hardest subject to master. But ironically, Seurat was immersing himself in this traditional education at a moment when this whole vision of art was under attack from a rising avant-garde. The Impressionists, led by Claude Monet, had deprioritized the human figure and turned their attention to landscape and light and atmosphere. So the hierarchy of subject matter that placed the human figure on top of everything was collapsing. But as we can see in the Bathers, Seurat was not on board with that. This monumental picture stakes a claim on the human figure as the rightful centerpiece of art. Yet at the same time, Seurat went against traditional expectations that if you paint a human figure, you should paint one that somehow feels alive and alert and responsive to the world around them. And that's the great paradox of Seurat's art. We can begin to see this paradox if we compare Seurat's painting with another picture in the National Gallery's collection, which is often seen as launching Monet's breakthrough to Impressionism. This is Bathers at La Grenouillère. Both paintings depict the outskirts of Paris along the Seine, but Seurat's canvas is monumental, 2 by 3 meters, with life-size figures who are centered and absolutely in your face. And that's a huge contrast to Monet's, which is small, scaled in the portable format of landscape, with the bathers indicated through just a few loose strokes of paint. Yet here's the paradox. Seurat makes his figures so visually prominent, but he also takes something essential away. Look at Monet's figures on the bridge. Even rendered with just a few loose strokes, they seem to lean towards one another as if communicating. The figures in the water raise their hands to splash. The sense of aliveness we get there is precisely what Seurat does not give us. His bodies have a waxy, almost marble-like solidity. They're not rendered in fluid brushstrokes. They have this polished surface of paint with lots of lead white in it. The absence of vitality in these marble-like figures is all the more striking because they confront us at human scale. Let's look a bit more closely now at the picture. What are some of the ways that Seurat makes these figures seem there and not there? Part of this has to do with how Seurat positions bodies in the landscape. He uses the water on the right edge of the picture to orient all the figures in this rigid, standardized way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 heads nearly all face the water in parallel with the canvas surface. The figures appear synchronized in a joint action, like they're being magnetized by the water, yet they don't seem aware of one another. They give the impression of being closed in on themselves, almost as if they're incapable of vision altogether. even though Seurat, with all these heads pointing in one direction, gives the very strong impression that there's something to be seen on the right side of the canvas and that there's an activity of gazing here. Seurat does something really interesting with the shading and blurring around the eyes of the figures. He does it partly through hats, with cast the eyes and faces into shadow, but he also sometimes just makes the eyes vanish. This is clearest if we look at the dog. You almost want to walk up to him and give him a pet, but when you get close, you see that his eye just dissolves into a smudgy black void. And most of all, there's the voiding of eyes in the central figure, the boy who almost feels like the protagonist of Seurat's picture. He has this helmet of hair that seems to literally grow into a curtain covering his eyes. Obstructing his eyes was clearly really important to Seurat. The studies for the picture show him making the hair longer and longer until his eyes are finally totally covered. That impression of a muting of sensory awareness extends also to sound. Look at the boy in the water on the far right. He's hand whistling, blowing air into the closed chamber of his palms to make a pure, piercing sound like a bird call. And there's also this very prominent ear right in the foreground of the picture. Yet there's something about the picture that feels mute. People often describe Seurat's works as silent. I think it's because of the visible absence of oral communication taking place in his works. The boy whistling into the void off the edge of the canvas calls attention to this. He calls out and there's no visible response. So the question is, why is Seurat doing this? Why does he drain visible signs of life and sensory awareness from his figures? One answer historians often give is that this is a social commentary. Seurat's way of treating figures has often been associated with alienation in modern society, of people, and especially working people, becoming deadened cogs in a vast machine. And we can see how that kind of reading makes sense for the bathers. Seurat makes industry the backdrop of this landscape. The horizon line, where we'd expect to see the river meeting the sky, is instead created by two iron bridges running parallel to the picture plane, and a smoking train runs across, and it's intersected vertically by factory chimneys. In some way, you could say that the horizons of the world that these figures inhabit, literally and metaphorically, is defined by the factory and by industry. Even more interestingly, Seurat makes a strong visual link between this iron horizon line and the central boy. The darkest tuft of smoke in the center of the sky is curving to the right in the same curve as the curve of his back. The crown of his head intersects the horizon line so that it's framed just between these four smoking chimneys that align with his head almost like a crown. Seurat is making an equation between this boy, whose senses seem so dulled, whose face is cast in this mysterious dark shadow, and the industrial landscape behind him. So maybe we can see a critique from Seurat of what factory labor might do to the human soul here. But I think Seurat's motivations for the very unusual strategies that he applies to the human figure also go much deeper, to the very question of what it means to be alive and human. Bathers at Asnières is the painting that came right before Seurat's breakthrough, his so-called manifesto painting, the one he's still most famous for today, A Sunday on the Grand Jatte, which Seurat began just 1 week after the Bathers went on exhibition. The figures in the Bathers are all looking towards the island of the Grand Jatte, as if anticipating Seurat's breakthrough to come. It was in the Grand Jatte that Seurat introduced his signature pointillist technique of little dots of pure unmixed colors. But the other equally radical component of Seurat's system in the Grand Jatte is already in place in embryonic form in the Bathers, and that's Seurat's system of treating the human figure. When Seurat exhibited the Grand Jatte in 1886, it was an utter scandal, and it might seem surprising today that this scandal was primarily not about the dots. What was so shocking to contemporary viewers was really the way that Seurat had presented the human figure. One critic said, "Strip these figures of the colored fleas with which they are covered, and beneath them is nothing. No soul, no thought, nothingness in a body for which only the contours exist." The Grand Jatte continues Seurat's commentary on modern industrial society, but it also opens up the historical frame. Might the little monkey be a reference to Seurat's knowledge of the new science of evolution being promoted by Charles Darwin, the idea that human beings are evolved from apes? This was a moment of not only profound social change, but also intellectual change, when the very idea of what it means to be a human being was in transition. Seurat's bathers, like his Sunday promenaders, are seen from the widest possible historical scope of the deep, ancient history of humankind and its evolution into the industrial present day. And I think that's essential not only to the strangeness of Seurat's human figures, but also to the enduring, evocative power of his pictures. If you're interested in learning more about art history, click here or here and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.